Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi, Charlie Craig. We are the Proclaimers. We're urging everybody to get along to Yestival in George Square on the 18th of September and encourage and move us forward in our fight for independence.
And welcome back, folks, to Through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are well. It's been a week since we last had a wee chat. Great to have you back. Lots to talk about today, and I've got some great guests to talk and discuss it with. This show's this week coming to you from Szczecin in northern Poland, just up near the northwest of Poland where I am today. So international travellers and everything you get here on this show. But to help me today, one of our other international travellers, our Phil Boswell, is unable to join us today, but don't worry. We have fantastic guests for us. And joining me today, I have from the borders, as always, my good friend Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne,
Greetings.
Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Yes, I have. Bright and breezy and looking forward to this edition. Did I hear some?
It was here. It was my end. So nice to have you back. We're also joined there by Eva Comrie. Eva, my friend, how are you?
Well, good
Lovely
morning from Clackmannanshire, the wee county, the jewel and the crown of central Scotland. Not,
Absolutely.
as some would say, the land time forgot, but the best kept secret.
And here we have hot footing us to from Edinburgh. Her Edinburgh jaunt is Sara Saylers. We got you out of Edinburgh and back home. Sara, welcome.
Hi.
I'm I the luckiest man in the independence movement, surrounded by three such beauties and with intellect too. Lucky me. And lucky you to do that. So, lady, it's been a fantastic week. The main story, of course, this week was our Scottish proclamation. And I think that's a good place to start, Sara, because this was kind of hidden from view and then exploded and was a tremendous success. How did it feel to be there?
It was amazingly moving. It was really powerful. You know, there was such a sense of history and symbolism. There's something about there was something about paying a tribute to all the victims of this union that was cathartic. I think everybody felt it. And then Neil's speech, I've not heard a better speech from a politician in many, many, many years. It was extraordinary. And I think, you know, I'm absolutely disgusted that the National didn't print that, didn't include any of it. Then we had next bit of catharsis was Eva's notice to quit. Boy, can I tell you how much people enjoyed hearing that. Just having that delivered, hearing that read out, you're out, your time's up, get out. really, and it felt as if it was prophetic, not just symbolic. And then, of course, we had the proclamation, and a lot of people put work into that. And part of that is from the Dublin proclamation. It's turned from that paragraph from the Irish to the Scottish. And of course, we very carefully added peaceful, because the Dublin proclamation was a call to arms, and this is peaceful. But that was, at that point, that's launched, and that was a real sense of completion. And it was great to be there. But as I said, it's a real indictment on, well, there's two indictments. One, the press got hold of our notice to members and so on to attend on Thursday. And the Daily Express ran an article about this sinister protest that was going to happen in Edinburgh. And they put up pictures. I mean, you would think, we looked like some kind of terrorist, implying we're some kind of terrorist organization. So that by the time we got there on Thursday, there were 3 police vans around the back full of police ready to arrest people. There were barriers. There were police all the way around the square. And then our 120, 30 people turned up. It was peaceful. All these police with nothing to do, thanks to the Daily Express. And they didn't come back, of course, and say, well, we got that wrong, or this is what the protest looked like.
Of course not.
And nothing. And as one blogger pointed out, there's normally press coverage. It's an official opening of a government building. You'd get some coverage. Oh, no. We're not even going to mention that this happened. Let's pretend nothing happened at all, or maybe it'll go away. So, yeah. But my real seething contempt is reserved for the National, that decided there was nothing even notable about this to report.
But the more cynical of ones have been saying it for long enough. It's not an independence paper. It's now nothing more than an SNP fanzine. Yeah. And we all must remember who owns it. The same people own the Herald. And we know where all the authorities lie.
We're talking to Ken MacDonald of iScot, and I think that magazine is going to become now the vehicle for the Scottish Liberation Movement, and all the things that don't get into the National will get into that magazine. So we're going to have serious conversations next coming weeks to transport that.
I would also suggest you use the bloggers who've got a far bigger reach.
Absolutely. Absolutely dependent on you guys. We're not going to be able to do anything without you guys. You're what makes this possible. Otherwise, the movement would be blindfolded and gagged. So,
yeah, fantastic. And Eva, how did it feel for you making that declaration? Was it you goosebumps?
Unfortunately, Roddy, I wasn't able to be there. I was at work, so I saw part of it live, and unfortunately had to see the rest recorded. And I absolutely share Sarah's contempt for the media, especially those elements who had the nerve, as usual, to bum this up as if it was going to be some dreadful, horrible event whereby a shower of nutcases were going to be saying and doing something potentially very dangerous. So we got the big build-up, and then when it came to the bit, because it was a very positive and very poignant, significant event, a day that should be marked off in every Independentista's calendar, we had practically no reporting at all other than what there was on social media. And for that and that alone, the National should hang its head in shame. I have a subscription to them just now, but probably the only reason why it's still there is because I've not yet figured out how to cancel it. And I don't think I'm alone in that respect. What is equally shameful is, as far as I can tell, not one single elected politician from any of the so-called independent supporting parties has had anything positive to say about Thursday's events. They ought to have been there. They ought to have been shouting it from the rooftops. And had they the brains they were born with, they would have been standing shoulder to shoulder with all those people who turned out on Thursday, and they should have been proclaiming their support for the proclamation and for the notion that the people are those with the sovereignty. And then we would have had an elected aspect, a popular aspect of an independence movement, and the only other thing we would be waiting for would be the diplomatic aspect, and we could have had a hat trick of forces combining together with the loudest of possible voices for our liberation movement. So for those SNP members and politicians who are watching, as has been said oft times before, get your finger out or you are in danger of the movement sweeping you away, leaving you behind and taking over.
Yeah, well said. Yvonne, did it warm the cockles of your heart?
It was really poignant, and it felt as though it was very important to be there. I was amazed at how many Prism viewers, listeners were there. Hello again to all of you who came up. And I was astonished at the police turnout. I'm hoping actually that we might have converted a few to the cause, because a few of them seemed to be listening intently, especially Neil Hanvey's speech. I mean, he was on fire. It was really, it was a wonderful occasion. And it reminded me in many ways of the anti-war movement. Started out very small, but with solid foundations and with great speakers. And a couple of years down the line, politicians were coming out of the woodwork begging to be on the platform. And because they realized that this was a real grassroots people's movement. And I got the feeling that there'll be a few people down the line who will be able to say to their grandkids, I was there. I was there at the start of this. It really was, there was something special. I don't know what it was, you know, something in the air. It was, you just felt as though that this was the start of something.
It is quite, we've discussed this on here, Sarah, all of us present and Phil and others, that it was going to be up to us, the people, and the politicians would eventually have to arrive, as Yvonne's alluded to. And this is, I think that's what to me is the most important thing, is that this is from the ground roots up. And that's the way, and you mentioned in Ireland, well, that's exactly what happened. It was started with the people, and then everyone who wants to join in, and even the gravy slurpers will eventually think, we've got to get in here quick before we get left behind. This is the start. Do you agree?
Yep, this is the start. And we've got a very clear road ahead. And it's, you know, we Scotland is so, it's so wounded. You know, our people are so wounded in so many ways by let's just face it, the evil empire. It's a disgusting, warmongering, saber rattling, self-important, inhuman piece of evil that you know, I think if people can't see this system for what it is, there's something severely wrong with them. And I think it's just the time is now, and the time is right. Yeah. And it's you know, there's a good basis, and Eva mentioned it. So, you know, people can't wait. People can't wait. You know, this isn't about desire. This is about need. We can't wait to save our people from what's happening to them. So that's, you know, with all the rhetoric, and the very real basis of this is that we have got to do something now to rescue people. And what Eva mentioned about, you know, the elected representatives, the sovereign people of Scotland, we need the diplomatic side, all of that's coming into place now. And what we'll have, I'm quite convinced by the end of this is we will have a system of not just a movement, but a political way of doing things that is harks back to the Scottish character, the Scottish way of doing things, where you have that interaction, that real input between the people and the government, the people holding the government to account, so that you have that, you know, that lovely flow, ebb and flow that is supposed to happen, where the good of the people, the common good, the needs of the nation come first. Government is held to account. we have the executive, we have the politicians, but they defer to the people. We can have not just an independent Scotland, we can have a much better country than we would ever have had if this hadn't arisen.
Eva, this, what we've said is very true, but if you look through our history in Scotland, we're slow to rouse. I mean, if you look at the Wars of Independence, for example, it took a long while for Bruce to get the people of Scotland to get behind him and get moving. But the one thing about the Scottish people, and it was the same with the SNP, it took a long, long while before the people. But when it happens with a rush. And when we get something into our bonnet, we don't let it go. And I feel that this is the start of something big, and that the people have now been given the incentive and the motive and the vehicle to start moving our country forward to independence.
Yeah, Roddy, I think it was last week I alluded to the fact that it appeared to be the unions who had become the opposition, both in Westminster and in Scotland. But this has been quite some week for me. Obviously, last weekend we were in Skye and the Alba Book event, and it was evident there that something's happening. On Monday, I was on very briefly on a picket line in Montrose with men and women who were subject to a hire and refire attempt by an American-owned company. And on Tuesday, I was in Perth at the demonstration created by the Windford Residents' Union, which took place outside the offices of SSE OVO. And on Wednesday, I was in George Square in Glasgow for the commemoration of the tragic and unnecessary deaths as the result of addictions, because that was International Overdose Awareness Day. So in the space of 3 days, I met a lot of real people with a lot of things to talk about, primarily their actual suffering or their prospective suffering and want, all of which are able to be swept away or were able to have been swept away and prevented by governments had they, A, a political will to make lives of those who had elected them better, and B, the ability to listen to what people say they want. And at the moment, those features are lacking not only in Westminster, but also in the context of the elected politicians of Scotland. It's abundantly clear that the people are demanding more. There's clearly an uneasy alliance between governments and media in relation to what they will and will not report and how they report certain developments. So we've seen, wonderful announcements about the amazing intervention of the First Minister in the dispute regarding bin men. That's an intervention which John Swinney said just a few days ago was not able to be made, but now it's been made. So where does the truth lie? Is this an intervention that could have been made weeks ago? And if so, why wasn't it? And if it was only done now, what changed to make it possible now? So I tend very strongly to the view that those people who are currently turning a defy to the people of Scotland will rue the day, because people on picket lines, people who are becoming hungry, people who cannot pay the bills that are starting to arrive, those who are worried about whether or not they're going to have a job to go to, others who are concerned about whether or not they're going to actually get a decent day's pay for a decent day's work, will ultimately combine. They've already started. So the politicians who have the job of taking this country forward really better get a move on, or the people will overtake them. Listen to what folk are saying. The people I met in Glasgow have suffered tremendously, unnecessarily, because the services that they need are not there. The drugs minister in Wisconsin was there. She made a short speech explaining how politicians would listen to those with lived experience and would learn how to change. I felt that was actually rather offensive and insulting to those who were in attendance and were mourning their loved ones. It's easy in Scotland to see where the problems lie. It's about poverty. It's about the need to give people hope. It's the absolute desperate need to create goodness where there's nothing but suffering and want. It's about, the Bolsheviks said peace, land and bread. Here actually it is about land and bread and peace of mind. And the quicker that our national politicians in Scotland get that into their thick heads, and I say thick deliberately because they're either obstinate as a matter of purpose or they actually don't understand what the country needs. But they better get the job done, because if and when they fail once more, there are thousands of folk like me who will take up the cudgels and we will make the difference. Yeah. It's only a matter of time, and the clock's ticking.
Absolutely correct, Eva. Yvonne, on that, Eva's absolutely right. The politicians they seem detached, or as I like to call it now, which, ladies, I invented a phrase, which is the Marie Antoinette syndrome. As if, let the people fend for themselves, so I'm all right. So, they'll get by. We've had tough times. I mean, we fought the war and won. Well, none of us did. None of this generation did. But that's the way they're behaving.
Yeah, I mean, everything Eva said there and more, the politicians have become so out of touch. I fear that they will eventually become irrelevant. They seem to be in this attitude. I mean, Eva said that they're thick, and I love that Scottish expression, tam, thick as mint. But the trouble is, they think we, the public, are as thick as mint, and that we will believe anything that they tell us. And they turn to Westminster every time and say it's their fault. And quite clearly, we can see from the bin strike, the relationship with the unions, that it's not just Westminster's fault. It's theirs as well. It's Holyrood's fault. And Holyrood has to remember that they are our servants, not our masters. And if they don't get a grip soon and get a reality touch, then they will become irrelevant. Yeah. And we will leave them behind, because people are feeling empowered now that if they can't rely on politicians to do the job, we'll just roll up our sleeves and do it ourselves. And, we're getting to that stage where there is a revolution in the air, because we can't rely on Holyrood to sort it out for us. All they're capable of doing at the moment is saying, oh, well, it's all Westminster's fault. Well, we're not falling for that anymore. It's their fault. And the treatment of the refuse collectors was disgusting. Eva's right. It could have been sorted out weeks ago. And the trade unions now are becoming the opposition. In fact, if Mick Lynch formed the Mick Lynch party, I think he'd be elected tomorrow.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a surprise, would it? But the thing we should be careful of here, Sarah, is that we're up against a real bad force. There was a release of a new book this week on about the young girl Sarah Began, the young 15-year-old from England who went to, and the story we were told was that she had been groomed by Islamist militants and had her head turned, and off she went to Syria to join ISIS. And we're now hearing that British and Canadian secret services were behind it. And that's what we're up against. I mean, at the time you mentioned earlier about the 1916 proclamation, we know in the IRA times right through, the British Secret Service had people implanted and did every dirty trick in the book. Now, as Yvonne's pointed out, writing letters to the present Prime Minister or the new Prime Minister and playing the Westminster game is not going to work. We have to do what we're doing. We have to do it from the ground up, and this is as good a place as anywhere to do it.
Well, wherever you start, that's a good place to start. But, people, I think people are basically good. I've always believed that. People are basically good. And when you're a kind of basically decent person, it's very difficult to imagine evil because you wouldn't do it. You don't imagine something you would never do. So most of us, unless you've done some serious research, cannot imagine the scale of the evil that is perpetrated by what is effectively the protection service for an elite. And they're an absolutely ruthless elite. You just do some reading, do some research, and you'll never see the world in the same way again. But I think one of the points Yvonne made that I'd like to come back to is this business of Holyrood saying, well, we can't, our hands are tied, it's Westminster, the big boy done it. And actually people are reaching the point where they want Holyrood to say, you've enough. You can lay out all the rules you like. You've committed so many crimes yourselves. You are so utterly lawless that nothing you call lawful applies anymore. So we're going to protect our people. We can't watch our people die. They're dying already. We can't watch this anymore. And if they will not do that, the point is coming. We talked about it. I just didn't think it would be this fast. The point is coming very, very fast, where the people of Scotland are going to go, well, if you won't, who will? And if there is a route, if there is a way in which they can say, all right, well, we'll take back our sovereignty. Right. We will form this movement and we will get standing and we will move forward on that way. And they are going to be irrelevant. They're going to be redundant. And worse than that, they will never be forgiven. They will never be forgiven for this. Our people are dying.
Yep.
They're dying right now. Our children are hungry. Homelessness is at an all-time high. Councils are shuffling people around at the moment to try and cope with the levels of homelessness that we've got. The suicide rate, I can't even begin to think about that. And they sit there saying, oh, it's Westminster's fault. No, it's not. They're not just going to become irrelevant. And I mean very fast now. They're going to be unforgiven.
I agree. Sara says all people are good, Eva. Obviously, exceptions being Tories. But I agree with Sara on this. It's time that we took action. But on your thing about the drug use, we said it in this show so many times. When the UK government said, no, you can't have safe drug consumption rooms. If I had been in charge, and I think anyone in this conversation today been in charge, said, oh, really? I would have opened them and said, what are you going to do? Invade? Take away our money? Send me home without supper? We should have just done it. And we should always be pushing at the boundaries to say, well, how? And that's exactly what was done in all the other 66 countries that have left the British. They pushed and pushed and pushed till it was an easy walk. Why will our government not do those things?
I'm not naturally a conspiracy theorist, Roddy, but sometimes at times like this especially, it's difficult to avoid a suspicion that there's something sinister going on in the background. I cannot for the life of me understand why the Scottish Government has a oh you can't do that attitude as opposed to we're damn well doing it and just see if you can try and stop us. I would equate what you've said in relation to safe treatment rooms for drug addicted people to the application by the Lord Advocate to the Supreme Court, for example. What I'd have been doing, I would like to think, if I'd ever been in a position so to do, would have been that referendum bill, which was drafted and available in March 2021, a year and a half ago, just in time for the Scottish parliamentary elections. I'd have been lodging that in the Scottish Parliament there and then before the Scottish parliamentary elections. I'd have been moving it then, I'd have had it on a short time scale, and I'd have been saying to Westminster, you didn't like it? Here, come on, let's do something about it. Let's be proactive. Instead of that, for reasons which have never been explained and never will be satisfactorily explained, we've waited a year and a half for the First Minister to appoint a Lord Advocate who she knows, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is not sympathetic to the independence case. the lady is particularly well qualified to do the job of a Lord Advocate, except in relation to pursuing the very raison d'etre of the SNP
Allegedly.
and the mandate on which they were elected. So the First Minister appointed the wrong person to do the job, but when she did, she stood back and allowed the Lord Advocate to proceed to the Supreme Court, knowing that would be another delay of several months, some uncertainty, and was in effect holding out a begging bowl, saying to people that she seems to think are the betters of the population of Scotland, please, sir, give us a little bit of this. So I tend strongly now to the view that actually what's going on in Scotland is we've a government in the Scottish Government who are paralysed, and they react only when they're backed into a corner. I would equate that also to the actions that were laudable at the time, I think from about maybe 5-6 years ago. You remember the First Minister announced at an SNP conference that she was going to have a review into the care experience. And you remember there were a number of children and young people who held up harps in front of the Chief Mammy, as she came to be known. That independent peer review took place over several years. A lot of hard work was done by a lot of very dedicated, kind, caring, well-qualified people, many of whom have care experience. Their work culminated in a report which is beginning to be implemented, but its implementation is taking far too long. It isn't properly funded. The government's attitude has not been sufficiently proactive. And in her fancy interview with Brian Cox last week, the First Minister admitted that. But that admission is 2 lines at the bottom of an otherwise fluff, puff piece about what a wonderful advocate she is for Scotland and for Scottish independence. But she acknowledged that these care experienced people had been let down. She also acknowledged in the same item that Scotland still jails far too many people, particularly on short sentences. So these issues in relation to prison and care experience have much to do with poverty and have very, very much to do with what's wrong in Scotland today. Yeah. There are reasons why we need independence. And these are the people that the First Minister targeted for fancy press releases and great announcements and grandiose schemes, and she's let them down, and she knows she's let them down. And all of these folk will remember that, and folk like me will remember it too. And we need to see action now, not tomorrow, next month, or next year, but right this damn minute.
Yeah, she does love her.
Can I ask a question?
I can announce today, and then she announces it, but doesn't do anything to follow it through. You're absolutely right. What are you going to say, Sarah?
I wanted to ask Eva, can you think of a single promise that she has made and kept? Because I was trying to think of something she promised to do. And that was the one that was in my mind, because I was there when she said, we have a message, we love you. And I was really moved by that. And
you're meant to
I can't see one thing, and I can't think of one thing. I wonder if you could.
I remember the election when she said a vote for the SNP is not a vote for independence. That was right.
She kept that private.
Yep. But if you remember in January 20, she made a fancy speech about how she was going to convene a constitutional convention. Where is it?
We're doing it.
January 2020, she said she would do it. When folk like you and me ask where it is, we get nothing but cheek, from her lackeys and her minions. Or you get abuse and you get called names when you remind them that, their pet policy, which I am not going to dignify by giving it a title today, but their pet policy that was hidden in the small print and lacked detail seems to be the priority. There's always money to spend on that kind of stuff. But when it comes to, for example, free school meals that were going to be rolled out across the board for nursery, primary and secondary, in fact, are restricted to the early years and some primary provision only, I think up to primary 5. So 6 and 7 in secondary at the moment only happen if local authorities are able to find the money to do so, although it was a Scottish Government promise. It's like the laptops for all the kids. That's not happened either universally. Or remember the bikes. Yes. A bike or a loan for a bike. Thousands of pounds have gone into the scheme, It's like the returnable deposit nonsense, where hundreds of thousands have been spent setting that thing up. That's fallen flat in its face too, because the government is populated by people who make popular announcements and don't follow through. It's headlines and the media don't pick them up in all their failures until it's opposite, because there's an election coming up.
Yeah.
They're just looking for votes. It's like, John Nicholson, well, you've had your election, you elected me, so basically I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And if you didn't like it, you can vote me out next time round.
In 5 years' time.
Well, Yvonne, it's just like, it is just like the Labour Party with a kilt on. Nothing's changed.
No, and yet when I first came to Scotland back in 2011, the government was so progressive and so groundbreaking, and was doing things that had been unheard of, and there was a real sort of can-do attitude, and a definite division growing between Westminster and Holyrood. And now I just look at, and this continual excuse, it's all their fault. It's like standing by and watching somebody rape a woman and say, oh, well, I can't intervene. This is a police matter. To hell with that. We have got to be more hands-on. And it's just not happening in Holyrood. We can't be a walk-on-by society, which is what they're trying to create. Scotland has its own legal system. We should be using it to test and pressurise Westminster continually and say, we're not doing that. We're not agreeing with your barbaric immigration laws. We welcome immigrants into our country and test it out in court. People are dying and being allowed to drown in the Channel. It's all being done in our name. Scotland has to stand up and say, we're different, we're not like that, we're not putting up with it. We saw some fantastic people action when Home Office vehicles went into estates in Scotland, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh to arrest people unfairly, and the local community gathered round and said, no, we're not putting up with it. And what did the police do? The police backed down and stopped and protecting the Home Office vehicles, and the Home Office backed down through people power. And that's what Holyrood should be doing with Westminster, saying, no, we're not putting up with it. We're not, we'll go through the courts. We won't allow this to happen. We will handle issues our own way and challenge it through the court. And, there's... if you have to commit a crime to prevent a greater crime, then that is a great defence in court, and nobody would be prosecuted. We're seeing this at the moment with this amazing group called Palestine Action, who are going into drone factories, supplying Israeli arm dealers, and they're wreaking havoc. And they every time they get arrested, the case never goes to court, because the arms manufacturers don't want to have to go into an open court and tell people what their drones are doing and how their drones are being used to slaughter innocent women and children in Palestine. So, I think we should be more clever in our way of standing up to Westminster, and we should be using the law. We've got a brilliant legal system in Scotland, and we should be challenging the crackpot nonsense that is coming out of Westminster. And, this is our last Prism before Boris Johnson buggers off. But look what we're going to get in his place. You know, Liz Truss is more barking mad than Boris. She's like Boris on crack.
God help us. Yeah.
Oh, that's going to get us a few comments, Yvonne. But that's true. We have to. I mean, I saw the Extinction. What do you call it? Extinction Rebellion people in the House of Commons making a great protest. They will get taken to court. Nothing surer. They will get slaughtered in the English courts. But on, to, you know, as Yvonne's given me a great.
What their defence is, and to listen to politicians saying this isn't the way to go about things. Well, it is. Direct action is now the way to go forward, because the politicians are sitting on their gravy train and they think that they can get away with this and just simply blame Westminster. Well, it's come to an end.
Yes, the Marie Antoinette syndrome. I mean, Yvonne's given me a great segue there, Sarah, right into our Liz. I mean, we've got one Liz on the way out. Oh, yeah, see us. Put it up again there, Yvonne. Shows your mug again there. Put it up. There you go. Boris Johnson is indeed. But we've got one Liz on the way out. Old woman. God love her. But we've got another Liz coming in who definitely sees herself as a latter-day Margaret Thatcher. But from my observation, she is addressing in everything with policy, with her demeanour, with the things that she says, the small 150,000 hardcore, mainly white, aged males, excluding people like myself, Tory faithful. There's no broad view from her. She is massively right-wing, and although he didn't have a great intellect, Yvonne's right, this one's not, she's worse.
Well, it's, you know, I'm with Eva on this. There are things happening in the background, and they're probably connected with corporate ambitions. I couldn't tell you. I don't mix in those circles, but she's clearly playing to a specific audience, and it's very interesting that the one she's playing to is the one that is still stuck in the height of the British Empire. You know, this is when England ruled. The UK ruled the waves and controlled a third of the planet, and there was no authority that could stand up to the British Empire. There was no UN, there was nobody to challenge them, so they made whatever rules they wanted, broke them when they wanted, told stories about how wonderful they were and democratic they were, while they slaughtered millions and millions of people. And that was the heyday, and the land of hope and glory, and that's who she's playing to. That's scary. That's scary. And could I pick up on just something that Yvonne said just very quickly? You know, if we don't do something about it, she's talking about the bystander phenomenon. You look, and that's what our politicians are doing. They're watching this terrible wreck, and they're looking at it and going, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. That's they're being bystanders. People are afraid sometimes to do something that an oppressor says is illegal. Well, they're going to say anything is illegal that in any way inconveniences them, let alone challenges them. But there's a principle in law. Eva would know what it is. If there's a house on fire and you can see someone trapped in the house, you're entitled to break into that house and haul them out and haul their goods out to try to protect them. So one law actually gives away, it stops being. And we saw the same kind of thing with Nuremberg, when people who'd followed orders to round up and shoot Jewish men, women and children were convicted because their orders didn't count in the face of something so hideously inhuman and clearly wrong. So you do have that principle, and I think we've got to start thinking that way. And we do have laws that are different in Scotland. And very, very quickly, I found out recently, I'm sure Eve already knows this, that in England, when they talk about crown holdings and crown estates, it's referring to what the state owns, because previously the monarch owned everything down to the last chicken, and everybody held their bit of land, all the way up to the monarch. So when that transferred That became the state holdings. In Scotland, that has never happened, and it's absolutely still law. In Scotland, we're a sovereign territorial nation, and for the vast majority of the lands and resources that come off the lands, including the seabed, what Crown estates and holdings means is what is owned by the nation, which is to say the people. So that oil and gas that people are being impoverished with, they actually own it in law. They own it. And it's had to be transferred into some kind of trust to be handled, not, by the way, by Westminster, but by Holyrood. So there you go. So there's a Scottish law we could be doing something with.
And I wish we would. To me, there's a great metaphor at the moment where the British capital ship, the Prince of Wales, is stuck in the English Channel, surrounded by tons and tons and tons of English jobbies. It kind of sums up the UK for me. Doesn't work, and it's full of shit. But while all this is going on, Eva, one of us alluded to earlier was our First Minister was having her fifth or sixth Edinburgh Fringe meeting. Well, people are starving, etc., and she spoke to Brian Cox, and she said she's looking forward to the day where she doesn't give an F. There you go, I don't give an F anymore. To a lot of us, it seems to me that day passed a long time ago. And from our conversations today, that's the problem. She doesn't give a hoot about the people, it seems, that are starving, hungry, dreading their first electricity gas bill. She doesn't care anymore.
Far be it from me to defend the First Minister, but in fact, I think it was Brian Cox who said he didn't give a 4X, and Nicola Sturgeon...
She said, I'm looking forward to the day where I don't give an F.
I don't think that's exactly what she said, though. I think she was kind of agreeing with him as opposed to repeating his words back at him. But obviously the sentiment boils down to the same thing. Yeah. I think where the proof of all of that mindset on the part of the Scottish Government and the SNP at Westminster, or at least in the context of the leadership of the party, is a giveaway, is if you look at what's happened over the past couple of months since we knew that Boris Johnson was on his way out. He's basically been on extended leave, during which time he's had foreign holidays, he's had a wedding celebration, he's been dressing up, he's been on various different jaunts on aeroplanes and on tanks and good clothes, all for basically fulfilling his own prime ministerial bucket list. And most of that has gone under the radar as far as the SNP are concerned, because while he's been off on his junket, they've been off on theirs. So sometimes when he's returned from his trip to the Grand Canyon, you've heard Ian Blackford shouting about how the Westminster should have been recalled. Holyrood should have been recalled several weeks ago. In fact, Holyrood shouldn't have bothered their backside having leave over the course of the summer. What they should have been doing was sitting there figuring out the quickest way to independence and the practical steps to alleviate the impact of the cost of living crisis. Because as we go over and over and over this, what we know is poverty in Scotland is man-made. And the reason why people are in poverty now is primarily because wages are too low and expenses too high. The Scottish Government could and should have addressed these issues long ago. They instead called for an interim report from their Poverty and Welfare Commission. That was delivered in June. The final, or at least the next stage in the report, was delivered, I think, yesterday. And what this committee of people who know what they're talking about in the context of poverty have said, after months of deliberations, meetings, and a report that's 21 pages long, what they've said is that the child payment should be increased. Well, we all know that. We knew that at the beginning. We know that poverty is about a lack of income and too much expense. They've also addressed in their report issues to do with rents and how those should be capped. And they've mentioned various other issues, all of which every one of us here, and I think everybody watching, would be able to figure out without spending months in effectively a highly professional, but still the same, talking shop. And that's what's wrong. We don't have hands-on politicians who know the electorate, know the problems, and are brave enough to sit down and say, let's take these decisions today. What are the problems? What's facing us? What can we do with the powers that we've got? What can we try and do by pushing the envelope out a bit further? Instead, kick the can down the road another bit and another bit and another bit, and by the time that people remember, it's too late because the day has passed. And that issue will remain as long as the current leadership of that party remains both in Holyrood and at Westminster. We're governed by people who are too scared, or perhaps in some instances too compromised, to make the big decisions and do the jobs that they were elected to do, surrounded by an increasing number of special advisors, civil servants. The number of lawyers employed by the Scottish Government's gone through the roof. And yet everything takes longer to do, it costs more money, and they're spending money talking about the services that they're going to deliver instead of delivering the services that they're appointed to deliver.
Yeah.
I apologise, my phone got off, me telling everyone, switch your phones off before you go on, and mine went off. I apologise profusely. While all this is going on, and Eva's right, Sarah, you're all right. But what are the Scottish Government doing? I'm just going to read this so I don't get it wrong. They're bringing forward the consultation, Yvonne, on pardoning witches. Now, I'm sure witches need pardon from the 17th and 16th century, but that's not a priority for me, and I'm sure it's not a priority for the photograph that Techie put up earlier of the mother with 4 kids late in the evening in Glasgow queuing up to get fed because they can't afford to feed themselves. And we are talking about using valuable time to discuss the pardoning of witches. They really have not got their priorities right.
Well, it's always good to see a wrong corrected, no matter how far back in history you go. But this government needs to be more concerned with the here and now. And I think what they have become are Stepford politicians, people without passion and without compassion. And, I was listening, going back to the start of the programme, to Neil Hanvey's words, and there were a few glassy eyes in that crowd, because here was a man who was speaking with compassion, with passion, someone who understood heartache, hardship, injustice, and we all felt it, and his words were so genuine. And yet we get these Stepfordized politicians that seem to go through some sort of SNP manufacturing process and churned out at the other end, devoid of passion, devoid of empathy, with just the same speak. Blame it on Westminster, and the only time they seem to get active is when there is an election on the horizon, and the SNP now is all about winning elections, which they've done very well in recent years, but they haven't followed it through.
No.
Their promises just seem to dissolve when the progressive government that was in existence when I first came to Scotland, what the hell has happened to it? There is this army of lawyers and spads who are employed not doing groundbreaking progressive politics, but it's more about protecting this Stepfordized atmosphere that they've created in Holyrood. It's, they've become sterile and they need to go.
I agree. We're coming towards the end, my friends. One other subject I'd like to cover before we go. Eva and I are actually already running late for another meeting. But it's this, there's a rumour prevailing, when Liz Truss becomes the new Prime Minister, there's going to be a snap general election. In fact, the SNP, that was the headline in the papers that kept the proclamation off of the front page, or was the excuse used to keep off the front page, whatever. Yeah, exactly. But there could be, they want applications in. I have my own cynical views of why they want to do that. It's more about who they want to get rid of than actually wanting to get new candidates in. That's my opinion. But as to, say, a general election, I think, look at this. The Tory government have got a 78-seat majority. They've got 28 months of their mandate to run. They've got a new Prime Minister who wants to get embedded and become popular. I know. They're behind in the polls. They would lose. Many of those MPs that would vote to an all-parliament would lose their seats. Why would they go early? I don't see it. Do you think there could be an early general election?
I wouldn't have thought that would be a smart move. I mean, you really can't tell what these people are going to do, but they've, as you said, they've still got 24 months to run. They've got control of Westminster. They're riding high on stories of how Oliver Cromwell sold Scots into slavery after the Battle of Dunbar and what they're going to do to the Scots. Why would they stop and have election now, especially if they think the SNP is going to run this as a plebiscite and we could just possibly sweep the whole of Scotland because of how dire things are? No, I wouldn't. Not for a second if I were them. But who knows? But I wouldn't do it. I do think that the SNP are kind of banking on them doing it. I'll tell you, I had a call the other night from somebody, just asking about the event and what he could do and so on. And he said he'd been at a meeting. He didn't say when, he didn't say where, but he said that Mike Russell had been at the meeting, and he said he'd asked Mike Russell if he was, could guarantee there was going to be a referendum in October next year. He said Mike shrugged. And he's, well, if it's not next year, we'll get it the year after. We'll have it. And he was so horrified that he was looking for things to do, and somebody passed him on to me, and so he went and joined Alba and Salvo. So
good on him.
He didn't know what else to do. I mean, that's the attitude. We're going to do it this time, come hell or high water. October 2000.
No ifs, no buts. No ifs, no buts.
If we don't, and this is unequivocal. I can't prove it, but if we don't, we'll do it in 2024, right?
Well,
so I think they need to pin it on the plebiscite, because I think they pretty well know they're not going to get the referendum.
Well, no ifs, no buts. They said. I'm holding their feet to the fire. Eva, do you think there will be a snap general election in the UK?
Roddy, before we get to that, could I come in very quickly in relation to the point that Yvonne made about the pardon for the witches, please? I found to my horror yesterday that there's a consultation exercise underway just now where you can reply online with your view in relation to whether there should be a posthumous pardon for the witches, and if so, what impact you think this may have on Scotland today. And I actually was daft enough to complete the consultation because it annoyed me so much. Why are we consulting about the impact on people who are dead? It's abundantly clear that these women should be pardoned. I doubt very much that anybody anywhere on the planet would disagree with that. So why don't we just issue the pardon? Get it done, over and done with, out the road, and let's deal with the living. And in relation to the living, a cause dear to my heart is what is referred to as the Tinker experiment. And these are people who deserve a whole episode, Roddy, which I know that you're considering doing. It's in the planning. But these people deserve an apology for the way that they were treated over and over again, very badly over decades, by the previous Scottish establishment and by the Church of Scotland and by Secretaries of State for Scotland and by Westminster. Some of the people who suffered here are still alive and suffering the consequences. It's these people, those who are living the experience, who should be a priority for the Scottish Government, not people who were dead and buried, centuries ago. However, that's a very important subject that I know you'll come back to, as we've said. Will there be a referendum next year?
No, general election. I'm saying, will there be a snap general election?
Snap general election, yes, I think there will be, but the reason I think there will be is because everything says there should not be, and always expect the unexpected, A, with Tories and B, with the establishment. The Tories will have a general election either so that they'll lose it and they can hand the mess over to Labour to take charge of or not, or they'll win it and they'll say, well, that's fine, you elected us, so here we go, we'll do whatever the hell we want, bugger the consequences, we're happy, and carry on as you were. And if you thought that Boris Johnson was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet, because pound shot Margaret Thatcher, poor man's Margaret Thatcher, call it which you will, Liz Truss is going to be nothing but unmitigated disaster across the board. And unfortunately, experience with the Scottish Government tells us that they are not likely to use her weaknesses to bolster the case or promote the case for independence. So yes, a snap general election. Referendum next year? No. But we live in hope, no ifs or buts.
Yvonne, what about you? Do you think there'll be a snap general election?
I do. And having a majority of nearly 90 MPs can be more of a headache than a bonus. So if they lost a large majority, but had just enough to be able to pass through whatever lunatic policies Liz Truss is going to come up with, I think that they'll be quite happy with that. And they will use that to say that they have the mandate of the UK, and they'll start to erode whatever policies they can with regard to Scotland. This is why, I can't stress enough, we need to get independence ASAP, because the next Tory government is going to be a nightmare, and I think that Liz Truss will make Margaret Thatcher look like a Tupperware agent.
Well, folks, we've come to the end. I'll stick with my bit. You all stick with. We can all have different views on here. I think Sara and I are right. That's neither here nor there. But the fact is, even if there is a snap general election and we get the other guy, Sir Keir, what a wonderful name for a socialist. Sir Keir, Knight of the Realm. I don't think, for Scotland's point of view, they'll not agree to anything to assist us with our cause. The policies will be not much different. They will not take us back into the EU. They will not take us into EFTA. They will not reform the anti-trade union laws, I should say. Yeah. So, it will be business as usual, whether it's with the pound shop Thatcher or whether it's with the Knight of the Realm socialists. But with that, just to say a couple of things, a couple of bits of housekeeping. Don't forget the Festival on September the 18th. We will be there live. We will be doing our show, this show, at 10 in the morning, so turn up. We'll also be carrying on for a wee while. And if you've got questions to ask the panel or anything at all, come in and ask your questions. Bring gifts, gin, rolls and sausage, rolls and bacon. Bring what you like. Do what you like. And the other thing is, on Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday this week, depending on when we can process it, I am interviewing Scott Forbes, who's written a recent book, The Long Walk to Justice, which is about the incarceration of Luke Mitchell for the murder of his girlfriend, Jodie, a 14-year-old girl in Edinburgh. That's worth looking out for. So midweek, I'll see you all again. And until we collectively see you all again, please, 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 take care.
I've got it circled in my diary. There should be a referendum. There should have been one before now, incidentally, but there should be one certainly. On October the 19th next year, as we've been promised, no ifs, no buts, etc., etc. And I think there could be one, because I think the Westminster government is on the point of crumbling. We're in the circumstances of a revolution at the present moment. People are looking at the £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 on their electricity and heating bills. It's extraordinary. And incidentally, in terms of arguing the economics of independence, forget GERS, forget this, forget the balance sheet, forget whatever you want. All you have to say to people is, look, we've got a nap hand, 5 fingers in your hand. We've got land. We've got water. Have you seen the pictures of Europe recently? Where the colours are? The brown goes right up to Yorkshire. I mean, a bit of Ireland and Scotland are the only green bits in the continent of Europe at the present moment. So we've got land, we've got water, we've got oil, we've got gas. We've got 5 times the gas that Scotland consumes. We said, well, the international price of gas has gone up because of the war in Europe. Therefore, the electricity bills are going up. Wait a minute. We've got 5 times what Scotland consumes in terms of gas. And we've got renewable energy coming out of our ears. Offshore renewables, wind power just now, costs £50 a megawatt hour. That's half of what the new nuclear is going to cost. And the nuclear costs, as they always do, are going up. The cost of offshore wind's going down. International gas at the present moment costs £300 per megawatt hour, 6 times. We could produce within, well, we already are self-sufficient in renewables. So you might ask yourself, anybody would ask, still watching this, we are self-sufficient in renewables, so why is our electricity in Scotland based on the international price of gas, even forgetting the fact that we've got 5 times as much gas as we consume? And you can reasonably argue to anyone that in a rule of thumb, an electricity bill in Scotland will be 1/6 of what they're about to charge, or try to charge people over the next few months.
Hi, it's Charlie Krieg, where the Proclaimers were urging everybody to get along to Yestival in George Square on the 18th of September and encourage and move us forward in our fight for independence.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.